Welcome to Draw This. In this episode, we're going to draw a pencil. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be using Corel Painter 2015 today. Let's go ahead and draw the main body of the pencil using the rectangular shape tool. And let's adjust the shape properties by turning off the stroke and turning on a fill. You can use any fill color you want. I'm just going to use this gray color. And this will define the overall width and length of the pencil. Let's name this layer Pencil Body. Let's change the fill color to any color that we want, and let's go ahead and add a tip to the pencil. We'll draw a rectangle and we'll use the move tool to go ahead and drag these handles. If you want to get the handles back if they disappear, just click on and off that layer. You can clone a layer by holding Alt and dragging with the move tool. So let's go ahead and move that over to the other end to create the ferrule or the metal part of the pencil. Let's elongate that and let's clone it one more time for the eraser, and let's just shorten that. Now let's double click to the right of the layer and that'll open the shape properties, and now you can easily change the color if you like. Let's give each of these layers a different color. Since these are vector shapes, we can manipulate them a little bit. Let's look under the white arrow tool and let's select the add point tool and let's add a point. And if we use the arrow keys on our keyboard to nudge this to the left, we can start to create a tip. We'll want to look for the convert point tool and then click on that tip to, instead of round it, make it sharp. Next, let's remove a couple extra points with the remove point tool, and now we have a nice triangle. Let's go back to the white arrow tool and let's just nudge up and down with our keys on our keyboard to try to center that. Let's name that layer Wood and let's add a new layer at the top, and let's hold Shift to draw a straight line with the Detail Oils brush. That'll give us a guide to be able to check the centering, and if you need to nudge that, just go ahead and fix it. Let's go ahead and just name all these layers so there's no confusion, and let's lock the ones that we're not using. Let's go back to the wood layer and let's just go ahead and even out these corner points to get them to line up with the end better. Zoom in just to check and make sure everything lines up on the eraser as well. Let's move the eraser below the pencil body and let's unlock the eraser layer, and let's inset the edges a little bit by squishing it with the move tool. Let's convert that to a default layer by right clicking on it, and then let's soften the edges using the bulge brush. Basically you just push in towards the edge with the bulge brush. Let's add a couple of center points to the ferrule or the metal part. So I'm just going to add 1 point on each side and try to even them up and get them centered. And then what we'll do is we'll use the white arrow tool to go ahead and just nudge them. And when we nudge them, we'll just nudge them slightly down to center them, and then we'll go to the left just a little bit to make it look a little bit curved. Let's go ahead and right click on that layer and convert it to a default layer as well. And let's round the edges with the bulge brush. Just push in towards that corner and that'll smooth it out. Next, let's unlock and convert the remaining layers to default layers by right clicking on them and choosing Convert to Default Layer. And let's crimp the pencil body a little bit by using the bulge tool just to kind of push it under that little metal ferrule a little bit. Next, we'll choose the Polygonal selection tool, and we'll use that to click and create some jagged edges here for where we've sharpened the pencil. Just go ahead and close that shape and then hit delete, or you can choose edit clear to delete those pixels. Now let's go ahead and go back to the wood layer, and we'll need to fill in that gap. We can use the Scratchboard tool to accomplish that. So just go ahead and fill in that missing area there. Now let's go ahead and make a selection of that wood layer by choosing Select Layer Content, and then we'll create a new layer above it called Graphite. We'll use the Scratchboard tool and a darker color to go ahead and draw in a little bit of a tip, and it'll stay confined to that selection, which is nice. Let's go ahead and clear that selection with Control D now that we're done with it, and we'll turn on Preserve Transparency and go to the metal layer, and we'll go ahead and fill that in with a more appropriate value. Let's do the same for the eraser and for the pencil body. We'll be adding color on a separate layer at a later point in this process. You can also just use Fill to quickly fill it in. Now to create the sides of the pencil, we'll make a selection from the pencil body layer. We'll create a new layer, and then we'll use the Marquee Selection tool to go ahead and cut out the middle. So if you hold Alt, you can subtract from a selection. So we'll just draw a rectangle down the center. That will remove that center of the selection. And then if we go ahead and go to that new layer, we can call that shading, and we can make it a multiply composite method. And then we'll go ahead and fill it with a dark gray. And that gives us our sides for our pencil. We'll reduce the opacity. Let's go back to the metal layer and let's make a selection of that layer. Let's add a new layer and let's call it Metal Detail. These will be the little ridges and grooves in the metal part of the pencil. I'm holding Shift to draw straight lines. And then I'm going to switch to the eraser, and I'm going to erase a little bit of this here and over on the other side to create those center grooves that go horizontal. I'm going to return to the metal layer underneath, and I'm going to use Distorto just to kind of dent it in. And then I'm going to shade those details with the airbrush. With Preserve Transparency on, I can just paint within those little groove shapes. I'll go ahead and do the same thing with the cylindrical shape of the metal. And then I'm going to go ahead and go to those little horizontal grooves and fill those in, making sure that the light is staying on one side or another. Overall, this is really just a big cylinder. I'm going to dim the opacity of that layer just to kind of blend it in a little bit more and make it more subtle, and then zoom out to see how we're looking. Let's do some work on the eraser and shade that by adding some lighter and darker values. Let's improve the shading on the pencil body and on the pencil tip as well. Let's also shade the graphite a little bit. I'm using the chalk for that. That works pretty well. And then I'm going to add some texture to the wooden part of the tip. I'll use the chalk for that, and then I'll blend it a little bit with diffuse blur. Let's go ahead and group all those layers, and then we'll choose Select Group Content. We'll create a new layer at the top of that group for tinting. We'll make that a colorize blend mode, and then we can use the airbrush to just go ahead and color on this layer, and that will magically change all of the colors to the appropriate colors while still retaining all the values that we put in. Sometimes I use Multiply for this, but today we'll just try out Colorize to see how that works. I'm going to add some highlights with the detail oils. I'll add more highlights on the metal as well. And then I'm going to add a texture layer above all of the other layers, which is going to be a Multiply composite method, and I'll paint with the sponge, and then I'll blend it a little bit with the diffuse blur blender. Next, I'm going to paint along the edges of all of these shapes just to give them some rim shadows. I'm going to save as to save a copy, and then I'm going to do Control E to go ahead and merge all those pencil layers down to a single layer. I'm going to hold Alt and drag a duplicate. I'll go to the bottommost duplicate and change it to Shadow. I'll turn on Preserve Transparency, select a dark gray blue, and I'll go ahead and fill that. Now we have a nice drop shadow. If we turn off Preserve Transparency and we go to Soften, we can soften it a little bit, and then we can reposition that and dim the opacity. Let's return to the pencil layer, and let's go ahead and create a selection of that layer, and then we'll create a new layer above it, and we can use that new layer to just kind of add some reflection from the environment, which in this case is the white table the pencil's sitting on. We'll create a new layer and we'll move it below all the other layers. This will be a layer for some scribbling that's on the table or the paper, wherever this is sitting. We'll go ahead and free transform that, and then we will choose the perspective distortion. And if we drag these handles around, we can make this look like it's going off into perspective. Let's change that composite method to Multiply, and then let's try to fade it out near the bottom with diffuse blur. Let's select white and the chalk brush, and let's just paint over that to give it a little bit of paper grain, which helps it look a little more natural. And then I'm just going to try to start adding some finishing touches here and there, just to kind of balance this out and blend it and make it look nice. I'm going to save a copy again, and I'm going to drop all layers, and then I'm going to use the blur blender just to blend along all the edges, just to smooth it out and make it not so sharp. This just helps it look a little more natural. And there you go, we have a finished pencil. If you enjoyed this episode of Draw This, take a quick second to like this video and share it with your friends. And don't forget to click the subscribe button to get updates when I release new videos. I'll see you next Tuesday for another episode of Draw This.